Alice's World of Orlell presents The Orlell Chronicles, Book 1, Guardians of Gayrile, by Alice G. Bjornstedt. Read for you by the author. Prologue. In the castle of Cercia, capital of Cuncia, early evening. Winter was coming, riding on the shoulders of a dreary mist of rain right before nightfall. Only the two guards, standing and shivering on the castle walls, saw the rider emerge from the darkness. Castle Cia had little reason to expect visitors at this time of day, less so in these times. Life had been uneventful since the fall of the tyrannical queen some 13 years prior, blissfully quiet, boring even, silent. But it was the kind of silence that left everyone on edge. The rider bent over the horse's neck, urging her forward with a few gentle words, his voice rasping and dry. "Just a little farther, girl," Dendaioki, brother of the High King and leader of Cercia's military, whispered softly. The horse snorted at the sound of her master's voice and continued forward. No, the silence wasn't a peaceful one, he thought to himself as the horse raised her head and trotted the remaining distance to the castle walls. Not in the least. He had sensed that by now, after hearing little from the Northern Isles in these recent months. The larger island of the two Northern Isles, Gayrile, was a Cuncian territory, and had seen its share of difficulties during the last 12 years. The country had been aided, or so they assumed, by a select few who had founded a sect of defending warriors, keepers of the peace, protectors of the common folk, guardians. And so they kept the peace for nearly a decade. Now, something had interrupted that. The drawbridge lowered as the rider approached, and the guards milling about in the courtyard stiffened uneasily as the horse clattered inside. The rider dismounted, swinging down from the saddle, his long sword tapping his leg as he walked briskly toward the castle doors. His hood fell back as he did, and the guards relaxed as they recognized him. "Sir," one of them started. Dendaio turned to him, the torchlight highlighting his face as he smiled wearily. Silver-toned skin, green eyes, and a long scar that ran down the length of the right side of his face. "Good to see you, Private. Do you mind letting me in?" The private nodded to the gatekeepers, who swung open the heavy doors, then looked back at the newcomer. "The king's been expecting you. You went to Badwater, right? How's the situation there?" The silence that fell told him that everyone in the courtyard was listening. Badwater, a small town along the northern coast about 30 miles from Cercia, was the closest source of news about the Northern Isles. Dendaio took a long breath. "Nothing good," he said finally, and slipped inside the castle. The palace bustled with activity of early evening. He brushed past servants carrying trays of unwashed dishes and baskets of linen, past courtiers gossiping in the halls, and paused to nod a greeting to one of his generals. But he hadn't come to speak with any of them. He reached the end of the hall and turned left, into the throne room. The room was strikingly quiet after the bustle of the halls, and completely deserted. For a moment he hesitated, not sure where else to look for his brother. Then the king's voice, calm and clear, and sounding rather weary, came from behind him. "Ah, good, Dendaio. Forgive me, I was speaking with the guards." Dendaio turned, clasping one gauntleted hand to his chest in salute before embracing his brother. "Not to worry. Good to see you. You as well." Jean Key, the High King of the Lisneys of Cuncia, looked at his younger brother carefully. Despite the lavish riches of Cercia, Jean wore a simple suit of dark leather, with red and silver inlays that echoed the nation's flag colors. His keen green eyes, nearly identical to his brother's, were filled with concern. Both Lisneys had silver skin and no hair on their heads or face, like all Lisney males. "Badwater's doing well enough," Dendaio told him now, as they moved toward the center of the room. "Despite their trade routes being interrupted, that is." Jean looked at him sharply. "Their trade routes? Then it's true," Dendaio said heavily. "All of it. Everything about Gayrile turning on us. This Saphicon person is no mere politician, and he's taken total control of that little island. What of the Dyrans? Surely they will fight. The Dyran kingdom cannot be troubled with war again, you know this. Not after the last queen. They are still recovering." Jean bit his lip. Gayrile was a Cuncian territory. Therefore, it was their duty to protect it. Something would have to be done. What of the Guardians? Dendio took a breath. This Saphicon, he has great power. He disbanded the Guardians almost the moment he was elected. Forced them into hiding, I've heard. Jean shook his head grimly. Then it is up to us. We will help Gayrile. Dendio paused before speaking again, uncertain about delivering the rest of his news. The news itself was so wild, so unlikely, that he wondered if Jean would believe it. But he trusted his brother, and he knew the news needed to be told. There's something else, Jean. Something about one called Cato. Jean looked at him, frowning slightly. Cato, he's the one we heard of last week. Saphicon's deputy, is he not? Yes, he is. He is also a wizard as well, or so I've heard. Rumor is he was attempting to create an army of undead, immortal warriors. Well, that's new, Jean said wryly, shaking his head. It seemed to be the goal of nearly every sorcerer that rose to power lately. What of him, then? He's coming. Here. He is bent on taking over Kuncia. Saphicon is as well, but he cannot allow his hold on Gayrile to slip, and so he stays there. Cato plans to attack us. His force is coming. Jean straightened, the implication of this weighing on him. Very well. In that case, we will be ready for him. Any other news? The look on Dendio's face told him it wasn't good news, even before he spoke. The rest of the news is that Cato's experiment worked. His army, the one he wanted to create, the Deathless Warriors, they exist. And they're on their way. 1. A Story and a Storm. 2 days later, on Gayrile. It was going to rain again. Rigel, who had grown up in this climate, could practically sense it. He raised his head and allowed the wind to blow salty droplets into his face. The salty scent of the sea, the distant clamor of the market a few miles away from the beach, and the feel of the cold ocean wind as it blew across the North Sea to Gayrile were pieces that made up his home and the life that he had here. He wove his way through the muddy streets of the township, moving past crowds of people. This area was known simply as the alley, which aptly described it. It was a narrow road between houses and shops, with the sea directly behind it and the buildings ahead and around. This allowed for a cramped passageway that grew all the more soggy at high tide, when the waves were caught in the wind and blown in soaking droplets into the alley. It was low tide now, but the coming rain made everything feel damp. He pushed his way through the crowd, a small, skinny boy with dark hair and blue eyes. It wasn't hard to get past people. He could hear the snatches of conversation as he went, bits of information. Can't buy a decent bit of fish anywhere. Soldiers say it's for rations. Rations my foot. They take it straight to their boss, more like. Bet he's sitting up in his lovely palace all fat by now. I assumed he was rotten the whole time, and you still supported him. Don't complain to me. He's good to us. We're all still alive, aren't we? Saphicon could kill us all if he wants to. Don't fool yourself. He's a cold-blooded man if ever I saw one. He's a politician, dimwit. They're all like that. Rigel slipped on the mud and had to catch the arm of the last speaker to avoid falling, which made the man pull away. Sorry, he stammered to the man, who eyed him distastefully. Thankfully, one of the vendors recognized him. Ah, Rigel, good to see you, boy. Rigel stopped, leaning against the side of the shop, grinning. Oh, hello, Mr. Kellis. Can I buy a loaf? The baker, Mr. Kellis, reached below the counter and produced a loaf of day-old bread wrapped in paper. Here you are, boy. Take it and be going. I have work to get back to. Give my regards to Norin. Rigel took the loaf, laid a few coins on the counter, and started back down the alley, toward the sea. The wind blew salt water into his hair and face. Despite the cold, he closed his eyes, relishing the coolness and the closeness of the water. By the time he reached the little house on the hill overlooking the sea, he was damp through. He pushed through the door, peeking inside. Norin, I got the bread. He could see the form of the old man by the window, who now turned. Ah, thank you, Rigel. How was Mr. Kellis? He was good. He said hello, Rigel reported, placing the now slightly damp bread by the fire. The sofa was positioned next to the fire, with a small table behind it covered in strange tools and objects. Norin's work, Rigel knew. Good to hear. Norin moved closer to the fire, the light reflecting on his weathered face. He had a small, scruffy beard, short-trimmed hair, and wore the simple garb of a fisherman. His eyes had a quiet light of humor deep in them, a light that had always felt so welcoming and trustworthy. Rigel didn't care that Norrin wasn't his father, didn't care that the old man kept his secrets close. Norrin had raised him since before he could talk, and that was all that really mattered. Still, he couldn't stop his thoughts from wandering about the past as he set another piece of wood on the fire. "Did you finish that net of yours?" Norrin asked him, moving back to the table. Rigel winced. "I forgot to. Didn't have time," he offered weakly, knowing it was a bad excuse. In truth, he had had plenty of time. The problem was that his time was usually eaten up by other things other than fishing. Norrin turned to him, arching an eyebrow. "Is that so? And what has taken up that time, then?" Rigel hesitated for far too long. He saw Norrin watching him, and knew it would be impossible to talk around this. I was at the docks yesterday. Watched a few ships come in with the Morris boys. We were playing forts and arrows. Then I went to Mr. Kellis's shop." "Oh?" Norrin hid a smile as he adjusted the screws on one of the tools on the table. "I was listening," Rigel said. "Just listening. I helped him knead some of the dough for the rolls. A few of the fishermen from the mainland came into port yesterday, and they came by to talk to him." He paused, then looked up at Norrin. "They had news." Norrin looked at him, then set down the instrument. "Well, tell me about it." "News from the mainland. News about how Saphacon has broken all ties with the Dairen people. I didn't really understand that bit, but is it true that he's trying to take over?" He saw a flash of uncertainty cross Norrin's face, quickly masked. There was a brief silence. "You are a very attentive boy," Norrin told him finally. "You listen and you know what is true and what isn't. And you ask your elders for confirmation before making an assumption." "Well, that's what you've taught me," Rigel said hesitantly. "You said I should always gather facts before making a decision, not rush in headlong." "So I tried," Norrin said with a slight smile. Then he became serious. "Well, Rigel, the answer to your question is a long one, I'm afraid. A long story." Rigel's heart leapt. Norrin's stories were not something to miss. "Can you tell me?" "Perhaps parts of it." Norrin held the instrument up to the sky, peering through the lens, adjusting it as he did. He muttered something to himself, then set it down again. "What is that?" Rigel asked curiously. Norrin glanced up at him and smiled. "An object to measure distance at sea. It is called a sextant. Before Saphacon, they were a standard among seafarers. Now, well, only a few have them. The rest were confiscated." Rigel studied it for a moment, then looked back at Norrin. "Saphacon took them? Why?" "He needed such tools for his army, to better protect the common folk. Or so he said." "You didn't believe him?" "Few did. There was little choice." Rigel hesitated before asking his next question. "Did my father?" Norrin looked up at him. "Your father doubted Saphacon's promises, as did many. Unlike the others, well, he chose to do something about it." "He did?" Rigel stood, suddenly excited. "Did he fight them?" Norrin set the sextant down and moved near the fire to stand before Rigel. "It's a long story, as I said, Rigel, but to answer your first question, Saphacon is not currently taking over Gayrile. I'm afraid he already has. He wants little doing with the Dairen people or their king, despite the alliance. He cares less for Kunsia." "Why?" Norrin smiled slightly. "He wants power, Rigel. Most people in such a position do. Unfortunately, however, Saphacon poses more threat than an ambitious lord." There was a moment of silence. Norrin did not elaborate on what sort of threat Saphacon would pose to them, so Rigel was left to wonder. The fire crackled. Outside, it had begun to rain harder. The alley would be swamped by evening, Rigel thought. "Tell me the story," he said finally. "Please, I want to know." Norrin sat in his chair, staring into the fire. Rigel sat on the sofa across from him, waiting expectantly. "It was long ago," Norrin said finally. "Long, long ago, Rigel, in other times, before I wore the simple guise of a fisherman." He looked up. "Before Saphacon, there were warriors, guardians of Gayrile. We guarded Gayrile's people and towns, keeping the peace and caring for those less fortunate." Rigel stared at him in awe. He had guessed something along those lines. Norrin knew too much lore and history, knowledge that was now forbidden to study, to have always been a lowly fisherman. "You were one of them? One of the guardians?" He had only heard rumors of the legendary warriors of Gayrile. "So I was," Norin said with a faint smile. Did you do the things the legends say you did? Fight dragons, save princesses, and wield staffs of magic? Rigel asked eagerly. Norin chuckled. No, many of those tales are false. Most of what we did was simple, and, to your young mind, exceedingly boring. We established treaties, defended the common folk, and every now and then battled a warlord. His face fell. When Saphakon rose to power, he first disbanded, and then threatened the lives of the Guardians. We were a threat to him and his rule, due to our closeness with the High King. Rigel looked up, startled. High King Jean of Kuncia? But I thought Saphakon has to listen to him, since Gayrile is a Kuncian territory. So he does. But Saphakon wields great power, and believes himself capable to eventually take control of first Gayrile, then Kuncia. Rigel was stunned. He can't do that. There's no way, right? I mean, the Lisneys and their army in Kersia will easily defeat him. I believe so, Norin said, but Saphakon has great power in alchemy and other such ancient trades. It has been said that he has created an army of deathless wraiths, which his deputy Cato will lead against Kersia. Rigel frowned, glancing back at the flickering fire. The Lisneys will fight him. They can stop him. Are you so sure? Norin asked softly. There was a pause. Rigel turned back to the old man. What happened to the Guardians? We resisted Saphakon when he first rose to power, Norin said. He was far stronger than us. Many of us were killed in that battle, and the Guardians were outlawed and scattered. Saphakon put great bounties on the capture of the survivors. He had powerful weapons, cruel devices he had conceived that made our current existence impossible. And so we were forced to go into hiding, in the guise of ordinary townsfolk. Another pause. It was raining harder outside. Rigel's mind lingered on the story, and he thought of the Guardians, of Norin fighting with them, and of Saphakon, who had brought about their defeat. Norin, he started softly, who was my father, really? He had pondered this question so many times that it felt almost strange to ask it out loud. Norin had only told him bits and pieces about his father. Those pieces fit into a puzzle that didn't yet have a shape. Norin was silent for a moment. He was a good man and a great friend, he said at last. He was with me during a secretive attack that we and another comrade led against Saphakon. We succeeded in that attack. Marin was killed as we retreated. Marin, Rigel repeated softly. It had to be the first time he had heard the name spoken aloud. The wind had picked up outside. Rigel could hear hail pelting against the side of the house. Norin turned to him, smiling slightly. You remind me very much of your father, you know, he said simply. Your actions, your bravery, the way you look out for the weak. Remember that, Rigel. You have a guardian's blood in your veins, so act wisely. 2. Soldiers in the marketplace. The rain let up by morning, thankfully. Rigel woke early and walked to the pier. Out here, alone before the open sea, he felt truly alive. The sun was rising to his right, to the east, painting the sky a fiery red. His thoughts strayed back to last night's conversation. He had a sense that he wouldn't be able to get much more information out of Norin for a little while. He'd seen the pain in the old man's face when they'd discussed the fall of the Guardians, and he didn't want to press further. Still, he couldn't help feeling curious. The idea of a time before the lingering threat of Saphakon was a fascinating one, and if the Guardians of Gayrile could be rallied again, he wondered what would happen if such a thing occurred. Maybe Norin would lead them. Maybe Saphakon could be overthrown. A northern breeze whipped over the pier, blowing his hair back and making his eyes water. That was a rogue breeze, he recalled Norin saying. A sign of the autumn months coming to a close. Winter was coming. He didn't remember much about his father, even less about his mother, who had died in childbirth. Norin had known both his parents, and so most of Rigel's knowledge of them had come from those stories. His mother had been strong, kind, and beautiful. His father, Marin, had been brave and loyal. Rigel had a few vague images of his father in his mind, clouded memories of a bearded man, with the same twinkling blue eyes that Rigel had. He could remember a voice, too, a deep voice with a hidden note of humor there. And Saphakon had killed him. He wasn't sure how, but it had been done. He jogged towards the market, where the muted sounds of the township awakening were slowly getting louder. It was the beginning of the week, so market would be busy. Most business in the alley relied on the market days to draw in the larger crowds. Vendors would gather from the outlying villages to sell their goods. He reached the market, which was already quite noisy with activity. People talked, shouted, laughed to each other as they moved amongst the vendors. Norrin would be here soon, he guessed, and would set up his tent to sell his catch of the day. Rigel sat down to wait, watching the crowds mill around. A sudden commotion to his right made him turn quickly. 3 soldiers, wearing the colors of Saphacon, were harassing one of the vendors, a small, slightly built woman. He watched them as they mocked her goods, then her looks. One of them reached forward, gripping her shoulder, his voice low and wicked. "That's enough!" Mr. Kellis pushed through the soldiers, taking the woman's hand and pulling her out of the soldier's grasp. Rigel stood, watching, suddenly unsure of why his heart was pounding with nervousness. The first soldier, the one who had grabbed the woman, stepped forward, towering over Mr. Kellis threateningly. "This don't concern you, baker," he growled. "Now get back to your shop." Mr. Kellis glared back at him, not letting go of the woman's hand. She stood nervously behind him. "Come with me, dear," he finally said to her, turning away. The soldier grabbed the back of his coat and wrenched him back with startling intensity. "I said leave off! Let her go or I'll arrest you for harassing this fine young lady." The woman stammered something. The soldier grinned at her, shaking his head. "Don't worry, missy. We'll help you. On our word." He winked and smirked. Mr. Kellis didn't move. The soldier raised his fist without warning and punched him so hard he staggered back. "Hey!" Rigel had moved forward without realizing, and stood before the soldiers, quivering with rage. The soldier looked at him in surprise. Rigel's whole body felt hot with anger. He jumped forward, kicking the soldier in the knee, which allowed his hold on the woman to loosen. She quickly pulled herself free and ran. "You little wretch!" the soldier snarled, straightening. His 2 companions moved forward behind him. The hot anger was slowly replaced by fear. Cold, bitter fear. Rigel turned to run. The soldier seized him by the back of the neck like he weighed no more than a kitten and heaved him to the ground. The second man kicked him in the ribs. Rigel gasped, feeling the air punched out of his lungs, and rolled painfully to his side. Another kick caught him in the shoulder, rolling him back over so that his face was pressed into the mud. He thought he heard Mr. Kellis shouting something faintly, thought he could hear the soldiers laughing, and then suddenly the anger was back, flaring through him like fire. He rolled out of the way of another kick and got to his feet painfully, raising his fists. The soldiers looked at him and laughed. The leader stepped forward, watching him carefully, then smiled. "You're a brave little brat, I'll give you that," he said finally. "Who knows, with training you could even join Saphacon's great army." He grinned. "What say you to that? Join the army, serve your country, never go a day without food again." Rigel glared at him. The food offer was invalid. Norrin had always provided for him. Not much, but he had never gone hungry in his life, which was luckier than a lot of people in this area. "I'm not in the mood for joining tyrants," he spat, without thinking. The soldier's smile vanished, and he lunged forward. Rigel dodged out of the way, but one of the other soldiers gripped his neck and flung him down again. He curled into a ball helplessly as the kicking started again. "Stop!" This time, a strong voice shouted the order, a familiar voice, a beloved voice. Rigel peeked through his fingers and saw Norrin approaching, carrying several large fish over one shoulder. His other hand gripped the filleting knife, and he had raised it slightly. The lead soldier grabbed the back of Rigel's tunic and heaved him up to his feet. "This your boy, fisherman? You're lucky he's still alive." His eyes narrowed. "From what he's said, I could arrest you both for treason." Norrin watched them, his voice calm, but a flash of uncertainty crossed his face. "Treason? How so?" Rigel felt a sudden surge of fear. Norrin was supposed to be in hiding. If the soldiers found out who he was... "He's called our noble leader Saphacon a tyrant," one of the other soldiers snarled. "That's cause enough for both of you to die, since it's likely you filling his head with such ideas." "Indeed," Norrin murmured. Rigel had the sense he was doing some very quick thinking. "Well, he is only a boy, sir. In his defense, I myself did not vote for Saphacon to be elected to the place he is now, but have since submitted willingly to his authority." I suppose the boy overheard me express some disappointment, and hence formed a hasty opinion. He smiled. Did you or did you not call him a tyrant? The warrior demanded. I did not. And as I said, despite my not voting for Sapphican at the start, I have gotten over my disappointment and have submitted to his rule. Several tense seconds passed. 2 of the soldiers seemed satisfied. Their leader was still eyeing Norrin carefully. Well then, he said at last, here's your brat back. He shoved Rigel away. But know I'll report this to Sapphican. If he thinks this is suspicious, I'll be back to kill both of you. Norrin smiled shortly and nodded. Warning is duly noted, sir. Thank you. He turned away, striding through the market, handing his fish to Mr. Kellis. Sell these for me, will you? Keep half of the profit yourself, as apology for this mess. No harm done, no harm done, the baker told him, glancing back at the soldiers. You sure you're both? We'll be fine. Have a fine afternoon. Norrin took Rigel's arm, and they started toward the harbor. Norrin, Rigel finally stammered. Norrin, I'm sorry. I didn't... Norrin stopped, taking his shoulders, and looked him up and down. Are you hurt? A trail of blood was running from Rigel's lip, but he wiped it away and shook his head. No, I'm all right. His whole body felt shaky. Now that the adrenaline and anger had gone, he only felt fearful, remembering the hate in the soldiers' eyes and the strength of their blows. I didn't think... I'm sorry. Calm down, Norrin said gently, producing a soft cloth and cleaning the blood and mud from Rigel's face. He checked Rigel's ribs, which were aching from the kick, but thankfully deemed them bruised, not broken. They might come after us, Rigel stammered wretchedly. Norrin shook his head and put an arm around Rigel as they walked. They won't find us. I guess that by the end of the day, the soldiers will have something else on their minds, and even if they do report it, they don't know who we are, and Sapphican has neither the time nor the want to investigate every single disagreement. Understood? Yes, Rigel said, still feeling miserable, but... Rigel, what's done is done. There's no amount of worrying that can change that. Norrin looked at him. But perhaps you could explain to me why it started in the first place. You're normally not one to go charging into fights. His tone was gentle, and he said it with a smile that made Rigel relax. They were bullying a woman, grabbing her and taunting her. Mr. Kellis told them to stop, and they hit him, and then I jumped in. Well then, you did the right thing, just in the wrong way, I suppose. Nevertheless, I'm proud of you, Rigel. I'm glad you spoke up. They reached the harbor. Norrin nodded toward the little skiff. Let's go. I'll have you work on your netting a bit before it rains again. Rigel climbed on board the skiff and helped ready the sail. Then Norrin guided the boat out of the harbor. Rigel remained silent as the little craft bucked over the waves, moving steadily out to sea. Dark clouds lurked on the horizon, but for now the sea was peaceful. Norrin showed him how to fling the net out over the water, and how to haul it back in quickly so that the fish wouldn't get out. This took up most of the morning, and the satisfaction of bringing in a catch drove away Rigel's lingering fear and anger from the fight. They had fished for a little over an hour when it began to rain again. The wind had picked up, rocking the boat from side to side and making further netting impossible. Bring them in, Norrin told him, as Rigel cast once more. It's difficult and dangerous to bring a net back in weather like this. Bring it in. Rigel had spotted a small school of fish swarm just under where he had flung the net, and had barely heard him. All right, just a second, I think I caught them. He felt the slight change in the boat's motion, and looked up at Norrin, startled. There was a faint rushing sound audible in the water. What is that, Norrin? Norrin had pulled down the sail. With this wind, it would be impossible for them to adjust the sail correctly in time without having it ripped to shreds. The Eastern Current, he told him. It's a current in the sea that occurs year-round. This time of year, it gets closer to the Isles. The boat heaved as it rounded the pathway of water. Rigel, still holding onto his net, glanced down and could see a stream of bubbles down below, all moving rapidly southeast. Norrin's arms, strengthened from years of boating, wrenched the skiff from the current's grip with a few paddles on the oars, and they were free again. A wave broke over the prow as thunder rumbled overhead. Get back from the rail, Norrin cautioned. Let go of the net. You won't be able to bring it in. His voice was muffled by the wind, and Rigel didn't let go. He could see the fish swarming in his net, and was not about to let them go. Hang on, I've almost got it, he shouted over the rushing water. 1 second. And that was when everything went wrong. He never saw the rogue wave as it rose up from behind him, striking the boat broadside and throwing them sideways. Ragel was thrown against the rail, and in the same second the fish in his net, as if sensing his hold loosen, gave a mighty heave away from the boat. It happened so fast, Ragel didn't even have time to take a breath. The next thing he knew, he was in the water, freezing cold salt water. The shock of the cold took his breath away. Something was around his right wrist, biting into his arm. He realized, in a second of horror, that it was the net. Somehow, he had become entangled, and now the fish were pulling away furiously, much stronger than he was in the water. He surfaced, coughing, the burning cold of the salt water stinging his throat. "Norrin!" he cried out, the words muffled as another wave hit him in the face. He saw Norrin at the oars again, saw him bring the boat around sharply. The fish heaved forward again, and he was dragged under, the threads of the net digging into his arm. Panic gripped him. Something was wrong. The fish were pulling with far too much strength for such a small catch. Then he realized why. He had been pulled back into the current, and was now being carried east by the roiling waves. "Norrin!" he screamed again, eyes blurred by salt water, making it nearly impossible to see. He heard Norrin shouting his name, and flailed desperately towards him. Another wave hit him in the face, submerging him again, and he came up gasping for air. He was a strong swimmer, but this water was unlike any he had swam in before. This was a roiling, clutching beast, this sea. "Go with the current!" Norrin's voice came faintly to his ears. "Let it carry you! Don't fight it or it will drown you! Let it carry you!" Ragel coughed frantically, but stopped flailing, realizing Norrin was right. "Norrin!" he called again, this time in wretched defeat. The waves heaved around him, roiling and rocking him. The net tightened around his wrist, forcing him under again. He fought back to the surface in time to watch the waves carry the skiff out of sight. He tried to scream again, but the water filled his mouth and he could only cough. Over the waves came Norrin's voice, tight with desperation. "I'll find you, Ragel! I'll find you!" "Norrin!" Ragel cried once more, and then he was pulled under again. The strength of the current was horrific. The waves, tugging him from side to side, left him helpless, utterly powerless in the grip of the sea. Something bumped into him. He managed to reach out and grasp it, forcing his head up out of the water, as the current dragged him on. It was the gritty taste of sand in his teeth that pulled him out of the semi-consciousness that he had sunk into. He slumped, his head on the beam of driftwood that had bumped into him, and in a way saved his life. A few strands of the net were still wrapped tightly around his arm. The fish must have pulled themselves free. Sand had been washed into his face by the waves. Sand from a beach. His eyes flew open, and he raised his head. He was 10 feet or so from the beach. He could see the dark outlines of trees and the sinking sun lighting the sand. It didn't matter if it was an unknown beach, Ragel decided in a second. He had to get out of the freezing water. He let go of the driftwood and half swam, half crawled to shore. The wind bit into him in another moment, making him shiver. He crashed down on the sand, shivering, his head aching, his throat still burning from the salt water. He coughed until he was sure there was no more seawater inside him. "Norrin!" he called weakly, his voice rasping. There was no reply. If Norrin had made it out of the storm, then he would have kept following the current until he found Ragel, or would he have gone back to Gayrile to get help from the other sailors? Ragel wasn't sure, but he sensed, with a cold finality, that it would be a long while before he was found. Where am I? He looked up, surveying his surroundings, and tried to think. The sun was sinking slowly in the west. Norrin had said the current traveled east, and Ragel had been carried by it for hours, and that meant he was on the mainland. The realization would have been more exciting had he not been soaking wet, alone, still sore from the fight with the soldiers, and only wearing his shirt and breeches. He got up and paced the beach for a little while, searching for any signs of life and for his belongings. He found one of his boots, which served little use, so he tossed it away again. He had no idea of where he was specifically, but he could no longer stand the cold. Norrin had showed him how to make a fire from wood being rubbed together very fast. Friction force, he called it. Ragel moved a little ways from the beach, just within the tree line, and collected tinder and branches. If he had gone east, that meant he was likely farther from home than he had first thought. The country east of Kunsia was a blur in his mind, and in the cold and exhaustion his thoughts moved slowly. He rubbed two sticks together in silence for what felt like a long time, producing only thin strands of smoke, until his eyes picked out the tiny speck of light from the sparks. He added more tinder and blew, making the smoke billow all the more, until flames finally flickered to life inside the pile. In the same moment, the images of Norin's maps of the world came back in a flash, and he looked up triumphantly. "Daffodilian," he murmured. And immediately despair set in again. Daffodilian? Daffodilian was a country of mystery and wilderness, of strange creatures and wild things. It was miles from Gayrile. Not only that, the country was huge. There was no telling where exactly he was, or how far the current had swept him. Perhaps he could get west to Kunsia, to Kersia even. Perhaps... A twig snapped behind him, and he jumped up, moving closer to the warmth and light of the fire. In the same moment, he realized how exposed he was here. Who knew what creatures lurked in these woods, or if they were particularly hungry? A figure appeared in the shadows. Not a tall figure, shorter than he was, slightly built. He saw the stranger edging forward slowly, hesitantly, then crouch in the bracken, almost invisible. He thought he could see the shadow of a large dog behind the stranger. "Who's there?" he demanded with as much courage as he could muster. The voice that replied startled him. It was not a threatening tone, nor was it a beast's growl. The voice was soft, curious, and, most surprising, a girl's voice. "Hello. Could we get warm for a minute, please?"